So we're going to talk about the lawsuit. Bless you, Michelle. I saw your name pop up. There are actually, well, the fourth lawsuit was just filed. There are three lawsuits. One is in the Northeast PIN MLS. Anywhere was part of that. This one just got heard. This is the first one that went to trial. And there's another one in Illinois called Morrill. We are talking about Sitzer Burnett, and we're talking about them because it went to trial and a verdict has been issued. So first thing I want to cover is, you guys have seen this on your Facebook page, you've seen other YouTubes. There's a lot of shock value to some of these headlines, because if you get shocked, you're going to go look at them. And then the content can be good or it can be bad. And you'll find that almost all of these are inside real estate, other agents, and so on. That part's sort of good. But don't be fooled into thinking it's only inside real estate. This is from Good Morning America. This is from USA Today. So some of your clients are going to hear about it. Now, this is an editorial comment. There is such a high amount of news cycle right now. We're getting buried. You know, if you pick up a paper, page 1 is what everybody leads. Page 10 is buried. This is not hitting the front page of lots of news cycles. We've got wars. We've got financial problems. We have presidents being indicted. We have, you know, there's a lot of things. The Supreme Court's hearing one today that is about, I am a wife beater and they want to take my guns away. How dare they? So there's a lot of stuff going on in the news that is taking precedence. But I promise you, your clients have read some of this. Scott Boudry, who some of you in the room know and some of you may not, he's a broker in Las Vegas, and he had one of his clients call and demand the portion of his commission that he paid a buyer agent 3 years ago. Okay. Hi, I want it back. I say all this not to scare you and make you upset. I do say this that we need to be informed, because when those questions happen, we need to know what we're talking about. So let's talk about what the conspiracy was about. It was filed in a very specific way called per se. Per se means that the guys filing the lawsuit had to prove that there was collusion, and the defense was not allowed to present why that was a good thing for the consumer. So everything we know about cooperating, having a buyer agent and all that, the jury was not allowed to hear. And they will not be allowed to hear that, because that's the way this was filed. And so if you take that, the conspiracy per se was, one, do you have to offer compensation? And the answer to that is up till about 2-3 months ago, the MLS nationally required you to offer some sort of compensation. Even if it was $1, you had to offer something. Now, NAR has come out and say, well, maybe we can let you put 0 in from now on. Now, here's how bad 0 is. We decided as our MLS in August that we were going to allow 0 to be put in. The provider at Paragon can't set it at 0. They can only set it at 99 cents. So they're trying to make a programming change so that it can be 0, so that we can be in guidelines here. So just understand that all. Second, do franchises teach commission to agents? Brenda's laughing because she probably knows where I'm going with this. There were 2 people they had recorded live. I will not say their names, but let's say every one of you has heard of the first one. And he was on stage teaching at a convention, and he had a slide up that says, if you charge 2.5%, this is how many more homes to get the 3% you deserve. did franchises teach? Then they had a senior vice president of, I will name this one, Berkshire Hathaway, had a very colorful recording about how his top agent, when I say colorful language, we beeped out all the time, how his top agent told anybody that wanted to discount their services, they could take it, they could shove it up there, and I don't want to ever hear from your bleep, bleep, bleep person again. This was on a live podcast that anybody could log into. So the plaintiffs had some pretty strong evidence that we have set sort of what our minimum is and what should be charged.
But to back up, before all this was going on, the whole premise, the foundation is an antitrust lawsuit. So what they're claiming is that the agents, realtors, are price fixing, and we are not allowed to have a set fee. The fee
Correct.
is always negotiable between the broker and the seller. So the stories Greg's talking about are in direct contradiction with what we are supposed to do. And that's where they're coming up with these lawsuits.
And the lawsuit was also based on a chicken lawsuit about 3 or 4 years ago, whereas the top end of chicken distributors in the United States were influencing all the chicken growers who are independent contractors on how much chicken they could produce so they could start price fixing. Okay. The next thing they based it on, did sellers know what was being offered? Well, we think automatically that we do it right. And I'm going to tell you in this state or in this city, because it's a city forum, we do it sort of right. Yeah. Unless I'm mistaken, in the listing agreement, it says what's going to be charged. It has a statement that the broker has the sole decision of how much to offer a co-oping agent. And then it says, will you allow me to cooperate with them? But it never tells the seller how much of that commission is being given to the buyer's agent, unless you were good enough, which I'm sure Brenda is, I'm going to brag on her all the time, that she normally will say, I'm going to offer X number of percentage. The next point, just a second, I'll let you, the next point is, some people said, and they had recordings and teachings printed in a training manual, I have to offer 3% or nobody's going to come show your house. Price fixing. Yes, Lynn.
When we do a seller's net sheet, it breaks it down between the seller and the buyer. Doesn't that cover our ass?
Not in the way they want the listing agreement.
Oh.
So let me tell you a little bit different about that. Northwest MLS is not an NAR MLS. I've seen their listing agreement. I've read it. They have a page and a half, 1.5 pages on commission alone. How much I'm going to charge, how much I'm going to give the other agent. What if the other agent doesn't require as much? Do you get your money back or do I get to keep it? If I'm the only agent, what do I get to charge you versus so on and so forth? They get very complex to make sure it's completely transparent on how the commission is broken apart. Do I think in this city we do a fairly decent job? Yes. Do I think it's completely as transparent because we know what's going on? No, not to the average consumer. Another thing, did buyers know how buyer agents were paid? Just last week, Michelle, thank you for letting me use you, Michelle, had a client that called a potential buyer call up and said, I called another agent, I won't mention the company, you've all heard of them, and they said, I'll meet you at the first house and you don't need a buyer agency, I work for free.
Oh, oops. Locally?
This was last week in Wichita. So they called Michelle, and Michelle said, I'd like you to come in and do a full presentation so you'll understand. And the lady, I'm relaying her story my way. The lady more or less said, no, I need to understand the commission a little bit more. Let me tell you how the commission works. This is what we get paid, so on and so forth. And the lady said, I'm coming in for your presentation because the other people didn't sound right to me. So when you take all of this in total, did they prove there was a conspiracy or at least some influence? And the jury of 8 people said yes.
And I think they were all renters, weren't they? I don't think any of the jury was any homeowners. Someone told me that there was none of them were homeowners.
You know, I don't pay any attention, and yeah, please use the mic. I don't pay attention into a lot of that noise because there's so much of it out there. I didn't read the background, but even so, if somebody only buys a house every 10 years, are they going to remember what you did last time? And the answer is no. Or they may have an idea. So the verdict, we were guilty of collusion. The original suit named NAR, Anywhere, Remax, Keller Williams, and Berkshire Hathaway. Anywhere is our parent company, you know, the old Realogy. And Remax offered a settlement that the other attorneys accepted. And if you read it all, they said Anywhere could pay $83 million without bankrupting them. So that's how they settled on that amount. Remax could pay 53 million, 55 million without bankrupting them. And the terms of those, I've yet to put my hands on the Anywhere. I have read the Remax settlement, you know, the legal filing. The terms say that any future lawsuits from past, present, or future will be excused from these kind of lawsuits if you accept our. That's what it says. Meaning, and just because they were presented that way doesn't necessarily mean that's where it ends up. But meaning, from the 49 other states that these lawsuits could be filed in, Anywhere and Remax probably will be exempted. Okay, so what happens next? Well, there's a moral case in Illinois that happens next quarter. Immediately after having a guilty verdict, these guys in Missouri, and let me tell you a little bit more about Missouri. Missouri was placed against the entities I told you from every person who purchased a house since 2015 to 2021. They were suing to get their buyer agency commission returned to the seller. That came out to the 1 point, and I'll get to the exact $1 million later, $1 billion later. But because it's a per se suit, we'll get to that in a minute, everything is tripled as punishment. So they won 5.3 something or other billion total that will be split between NAR, Berkshire Hathaway, and Keller Williams. From everything I've read from the smartest people I know, none of those 3 entities can cover 1/3 of that. And as you would naturally think, will there be an appeal? Yes, there will be an appeal. Again, everything I read says they might appeal the dollar amounts. They might appeal the judgment. There is very rarely, if ever, a verdict is overturned, they will overturn a jury trial. They could possibly do it if there was a procedure that wasn't followed, but nobody I've read has said the procedures was wrong. There is one potential question, but it would be stupid to do it. And that was the podcast that I alluded to earlier wasn't sent over to the prosecution as discovery, and they objected to that. And the judge and the response was, we were doing it to impugn the credibility of the client that just says we always do things right perfectly. Could be allowed, but anyway you look at it, if they do another trial next time, it will definitely be in discovery and they'll get their butts handed to them again. So the next thing that happens now that we have a verdict and we have a decision by the jury is a judge has to decide the next steps. The judge can write orders. The orders could say sellers can no longer pay commissions. The orders could say the MLS must not offer compensation. They could say the MLS cannot require compensation, or he could write no orders at all. Doubtful, but he could. If the other party is any of the other two parties are going to appeal, they have to post a bond. The best estimates I can get is to get a bond for the amount of money we are talking about. It's $300 million per person. And if they can't post a bond, then they can't really appeal. Because the judge wants to make sure during the appeal process, if you're going to question the verdict, we want to make sure you've got skin in the game to cover what you've already been awarded. There is some talk that Keller Williams and Berkshire Hathaway may try to settle because they don't have that much money. And you know, the big term in law is don't sue your client so far down that they go bankrupt. If you do that, you get nothing.
Question real quick. So is each of these like only the branches are being held liable of each of the companies, or each company as a whole?
The
is being-
franchisees, the very top people.
So the whole thing.
Yeah, we would not be affected yet. Okay. But there will be more suits filed. So immediately after that suit was won, the same lawyers already had the paperwork in and said, here, we now want to file the same suit against Compass, EXP, Weichert, United, Howard Hanna, Douglas Elliman in Missouri. And there's still 49 more states that it can go into. Boy, your faces all look like, oh my God, we've been hit with a 2x4 here. Hmm? Perfect storm. The final piece is the DOJ is getting involved. They want to review all the settlements because they don't want anybody to practice dual agency ever. And while in this state, we're pretty decent about, you know, are we a transaction broker? Are we a buyer agent? Are we a seller agent? And I'm not sure transaction broker isn't really just a veil over dual agency, could sorta. The DOJ doesn't want one party representing both sides. And
That
it's
is-
and that's agency.
That is so funny that they would say that, because by penalizing the buyer's agents, now you're getting rid of having representation on both sides of the table.
see,
So
the-
it's contradictive.
But the jury didn't get to hear that. And when I say transactions kind of thinly veiled, there are people that certainly do it right. I never tell you to party, and I don't get into your, I'm here to. But there are people, I'll tell you about Florida in a minute, that definitely do, and they, in their state, they do practice dual agency. Thank you. There's a lot of states. So I'm just telling you that through all this, we have a verdict. We don't have any judge's orders, and we may not have for 6 months. The DOJ is putting their nose in the business. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do. See what my next slide is. So these are the settlements that I alluded to. And these are some of the verbiage that I pulled out of the RE/MAX settlement, which I'm told is almost identical to the Anywhere, and about how they will make changes and be excluded. One of the first things both parties did, my franchise agreement says that everybody who works in my company will be a realtor. And both RE/MAX and Anywhere said, we're not going to have that policy anymore. You can be a non-realtor, because we think the realtors have done some things that may not be above board like we'd like to represent. I can see Cheryl shaking her head. It is projected at this moment, there will be between 40 and 60% less realtors in the United States in the next 24 months.
And guys, that's not just on the national side, that's locally too. So I know there's been a lot of talk that's going around that how it's going to affect our local association and the services that we receive. So
And some of that comes from NAR required you to put compensation in the MLS and required you to be a realtor to get access to the MLS. And that goes against the whole price fix inclusion and that kind of stuff. Now, again, no orders have been issued. And there would be a significant loss. How many people want to take Wygan to court with an attorney to sue over a commission instead of going downtown to arbitrate it? And how many people said there will no longer be a code of ethics that you can take somebody to downtown? You have to report them to the state, who's understaffed and underdollared, trying to maintain all this. So part of what I was trying to cover here is the verdict sounds bad. There are people out there preaching that buyer agent is going to go away. There's not going to be any money in it. You're all going to die, and realtors are going to go away. The orders have not been pushed out yet. My initial part of what we're talking about here is not to scare the dickens out of you, but when one of those informed clients comes up to you and asks you, why are we offering X percentage to the other agent? I would advise you not to say, because nobody will show it if you don't. That's not why we do that. We do that because we want the buyer agent to hold up their end and do the things that they should to get to a successful closing. And there is value in what a buyer agent does. And you need to know your value on your side as value and as a listing agent and as a buyer agent. So what should you do? First, don't panic. Nothing has come down yet. I just laid out the worst case scenarios. Do not panic. You guys are professionals. How can you protect yourself? Well, in my humble opinion, for the next 2 years, maybe 3 years, your sphere of influence is gold. If you don't treat it with that kind of respect and as a way of avenue for you to find business, this is who you should be talking to. People that you already have earned their respect, that you already have a relationship. And that doesn't mean, I've heard agent after agent say, I'm a referral agent only. Well, that's great. If your clients remember to call you when it's time. I remember early on, and I'll use her name, Connie was working here, and she was so ticked off because her sister-in-law, who she talked to all the time, forgot she was an agent and bought a new home with somebody else because we don't find creative, informative, valuable ways to remind our sphere we are real estate agents. Categorize your SOI into buyers and sellers. I know it's very easy to have a spreadsheet or, like my friend Tulio, cards. And if I were him, I'd tell him right now, take all the buyers, put them in the front, and all the sellers, put them in the back. But find some way to categorize them because you're going to be reaching them in much different avenues going forward. I like the neighborhood news. It comes in Moxie, put an address in. Once a month, it sends out the activity in that neighborhood. If somebody's house goes on the market, everyone wants to know how much it went on or how much it sold for. Systemize your contacts. Tulio's got them systemized, but break them down even farther. Was this somebody who bought 10 years ago? Is this somebody who bought last year? Start figuring out what your sphere of influence actually gives you in power. I just did a 20-year study of MLS, and I compared it with all kinds of things and how prices rose and something. What I found is currently in Wichita, according to the Census Bureau, the average Wichitan sells their house every 10 years. It used to be every 6.5. So if you're not reaching back to those 10-year clients, you may be missing the boat. And if you're only looking at people who bought 2 years ago, you probably aren't going to get them to sell their house right now. So you have to understand it, and always update and correct. If you call somebody, make a note. If you've contacted them, make a note. Make sure you know what's going on with them. Second, for buyer agency, you need to, if you haven't already done it, know your value as a buyer agent. What do you bring to the table? If your answer is, I have a lockbox key, you just lost. I think Lance was dealing with somebody that had a listing that's one of those $5.95 special type deals. And basically after it got put in the MLS, the owner's on their own. Is there value in that? Do you have more value beyond just putting it in the MLS? And if you do, what is it? And how do you vocalize it and how you monetize it? Does everybody know what I mean by monetize? If you can't prove to your client that your value is worth X number of dollars to them, that's how you monetize it. I take professional pictures I don't charge you for. That saves you X number of dollars. I go out there when the house is inspected and I save you X number of dollars. I have this safety of the lockbox key. That's worth X number of dollars. Figure out how to monetize what your value is. Negotiating skills is not a small part of that on either the buyer side or the seller side. Even better if you have a client that says, Cheryl saved me $10,000 buying this $60,000 house. I would use Cheryl every single time. See how that kind of testimonial will monetize? When you talk about client testimonials, we have a testimonial program. I know a lot of you use Google. I'm still looking in how we can best use Google. But somewhere have a rating of your testimonials, and then be sure you cherry pick your testimonials, and that puts you in the best light for helping a client and upping your value. Listings, again, utilize your SOI. Look at those clients who sold 10 years ago. I know for a fact there are people in this room that sold a house at least 7 years ago, and they haven't talked to the person since, not once. Is that how you're going to use your SOI? If they're moving every 7 to 10 years, you should know when those people bought a house, so that those are the folks you're concentrating on now. And again, know your value. You can a value presentation and monetize your value. I got X number of dollars more listing than the house next door because blank, blank, blank. I do these negotiations for you, and I've been trained in how to do negotiations, and I'm better at it than 90% of the agents in the city. Find your niche and keep building on it. Some of it's brand. If you look at our brand, they surveyed 13,000 people last year who, I've updated our stat show, who bought or sold a house. Better Homes and Gardens was on top at 95%. Century 2 had, have I heard of them? Century 21, thank you, was next at 94%. Our name has some power. Don't forget about that. And people from outside the city you've heard from. We interviewed an agent yesterday. I can't mention the name. And they were knocking their present company of Keller Williams because the name Keller Williams means nothing unless you're buying or selling a house, and then only if you are utilizing them. They said Better Homes has homes right in the name. Use that. Tell them that people know what we do because of the name. So now the best guesses that I've heard from all the people out there and some of my own. I'm guessing attorneys are getting rich off this. Does anybody agree with that? Yeah. You guys,
What they make is any different.
oh no, they make 30% or 40%. And you all have seen the television commercials with mesothelioma and however you say it. Have you bought or sold a house in the last 10 years? Called 1-800. I get you money. I believe that listing commissions are going to have a lot more detail. We're already looking at it at the local board, and they need to. We want people to understand where the money goes. I think from what I gathered, that's most of the transparency folks have talked about transparency.
Greg, I'm gonna jump in there real quick. Just a thought that maybe we need to take a good hard look at language we need to add to our listing agreements, spelling out the commissions until we have something from our local association that changes the listing agreement. So Sandra and I do that with
And I'm glad,
special
yeah.
stuff that's done with the commission.
and I think a lot of our agents in here have done things like, if I sell your house and there's co-oping agents percentage is this, but they write in the back, but I'll lower it to this if I'm the only agent involved. Now, part of the reason I'm very proud of you as a company, or us as a company, I have never ever said what the base commission is, and I've always said you guys have the ability to adjust it as you see fit because you're independent contractors. There are companies out there, and I know several of you who worked for them because you worked with me in some of them, that their managerial book says you have to charge this. If you charge anything below that, you have to call and get manager approval, and you have to make up the difference that the company would have gotten anyway. And so when you start thinking about why are they accusing us of collusion? Well, there were a lot of really good reasons. And, you know, a bad apple screws it up for everybody. So I love that we have always decided on our own. Now, I will say this. I have taken a couple of agents. You know, I only list every house I do for 0.5%. And I bring them in and say, how are you valuing your services? Could you do this or that? And let's bring them up to where they're getting more what they deserve. But I never say what that is. That's up to them. The way it is. NAR could drop. That's been predicted by a lot of people. Other companies will settle. Absolutely. If I'm a JPAR or Compass, do I want to go through a trial and spend all that money on attorneys to get hit with a $1 billion? No. I'm really shocked that more people didn't settle when Anywhere and Remax did. That was a big deal. A lot of people are guessing that the MLS either can or absolutely must have the ability to offer no compensation. That doesn't mean they always will. There are some people predicting right now that part of the judge's orders will be the seller can never pay any part of the buyer agent compensation. Now, it's easy to look at in this lens of we don't have enough inventory. But look back to 2008. Sellers were offering all kinds of stuff, trips and this and that to get you to sell their house. So I don't know how that'll all shake out. I believe the MLS will be a separate company. I think that's going to happen largely across Northwest and Penn, and there's one in Chicago. These are all non-realtor and very large, like 35,000, 40,000 members. The brokers own it. They follow a lot of the realtor guidelines, but they're not under the realtor umbrella. I believe that could easily happen. There's a lot of people who are predicting buyer leads going to have less value because it's going to be harder to get people to buy or to sign buyer agencies. So let me describe a brief one. I was on a call of 30 brokers last week. Vegas, Utah, Florida, all around the country. They don't make their agents sign buyer agencies because they don't know how to present it and they are afraid they're scare the clients off. And I thought, how lucky are we that we have a Beretta that we right up front. Here's the agency. Here's what's going to happen. Do you want this or this? And we have no problem. But how many of you have sat at I'm writing you a contract, so let me get your buyer agency at the same time. I think we need to be more upfront about explaining it and don't be afraid of it. They were, I mean, I was talking to brokers, we never ever require buyer agency because my agents just won't fill one out. Okay, lovely. You got to have a piece of paper to have agency. If you don't have it, you can't do, you know, our state says you have to do this, 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 and this if you're a buyer agent. I think we're fortunate our state took care of us that much. And I'm sure there's a lot of repercussions we haven't even thought of yet. I just kind of put up a general list of things that could happen. So let me see, that's the end of it. I guess my question now that I've told you all this crap, how do I stop my sharing? Is now it's time for you to ask. I promise you I've got more in my big brain than you guys would want to hear about these damn lawsuits. But I'm happy to answer whatever questions you may have.
I think my biggest question is,
Speak up a little loud. I can't hear you.
You scared me.
Well, you're awake.
I got the microphone.
They never sound like the microphones are on.
Okay, I do have a big voice. My question is, how is the best way to present to a seller that it is in their best interest to offer that compensation to a buyer's agent? What's the verbiage that we really is going to nail that home?
Does anybody else want to respond here? I mean, we don't want to say other agents won't show it if.
It takes there's actually a lot of reasons, and I'm sitting here thinking, how do we deal with this proactively as an office? And I think what we need to do is have these roundtables and bring these questions to each other and share what works with each other. Do this as an office, whether it's, I mean, weekly would be great. Let's brainstorm. Right off the bat, I would tell a seller it's less liability for you, Mr. Seller, when the buyer has an agent representing them, other than fraud and disclosure. The liability is more on the buyer's agent than it is on the seller's head for discovery of what are the schools, what are the boundaries, what are the. So there is a lot of benefits for a seller to pay a buyer's agent. We need to work together on this.
And let me add one initially. I like Cheryl's idea doing the roundtable. The history of buyer agency is before that, it's called sub-agency. So I'm the listing agent. Lance is bringing a buyer. He's a sub-agent of the seller. Whatever he says to that seller, he's representing the seller and he doesn't know him from squat. So by the establishment of a buyer agent, that protects the seller from the liability of what that buyer agent is telling somebody. That's a big deal to remember. We still gave out that percentage compensation before, but Mr. Seller, you were liable for whatever they said. You want to be that way? No, you don't. That's one thing I would suggest. I think there's a lot of duties that they do as well. And some of those duties are, to be at the house when the inspection's going on, make sure it's safe, schedule the inspection and the negotiations and getting the well looked at and all those things, so they earn their pay. You can require that. You can say, I will not give out a CBS code. You must be there the entire time. That is something you, as a listing agent, and you don't say, let me preface this. You don't say, I don't let anybody do that to me. You say, I've discussed it with the seller and he wants an agent here whenever and as the buyer agent, that is your responsibility. It's always the seller or the buyer that requires this, never us.
So
no, don't throw me under the bus.
Recently, as the stuff was coming out, I talked with a seller who asked whether or not by lowering the amount that they offer to a buyer, if that would potentially keep buyers and their agents from showing the house. So I was completely, we were asked that. And I said, ethically, we're right now, as the way the rules are, regardless of what the compensation is, we're supposed to or required to show it anyway. The downside is that not all the apples in the apple cart are good apples. And yes, there is that possibility that someone may not decide to show it. Now with the change, and this is what I told them, with the changes that are possibly coming, now there's a chance that I could say, you know what? I'm not getting compensated. I can't show this to you. So there are going to be realtors out there that will, I shouldn't say realtors anymore, agents out there that will possibly do that. That was my answer to them, was that there is a possibility that could happen. It's not supposed to, but it could.
To piggyback on what Lance said, the state of Washington changed their law because of all this, that said if you are a buyer agent and you're not being compensated or fairly compensated, you are not obligated to show a home. I know Cheryl went, huh? Well, didn't you call the listing agent, say, I don't have an agent? Yes, Erica?
Okay, so in alignment with that, even though we're not telling sellers, agents may not show your home if you're not properly compensating. Legitimately, couldn't we tell them that buyers, as we go through the process of setting up a search for them, they could say, I don't want your search results to show me any properties that have less than a certain or no compensation. And because those results are still going to be on websites like realtor.com and Zillow and all that, where buyers can go look at those.
Yep.
But they can say, I don't have the money, because our buyer agency forms shows what we are charging. And if we're not compensated from the selling side, then the buyers are responsible for it.
There is certainly that possibility, and they can say that.
So
we don't want to suggest that to them.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is, but things like that, bringing up what ifs on, potentially a buyer could say, I don't want you to show me houses that.
Hence why it's very important when you're discussing your buyer agency.
Yeah.
This is what I charge for my services, and here's why I do it. What happens if we want to look at a house that's not offering compensation? Are you willing to pay that? Or would you prefer to look at other homes? You can ask them that.
So Greg kind of alluded to this earlier. I'm working with a buyer moving here from out of state. It's a relocation program. So I'm already paying out a referral fee basically. And the home that we looked at was one of those, like you said, flat rate. It's not necessarily a flat rate, but I wasn't going to get compensated the full amount. And when I sat down with the buyers and explained buyer agency to them, and I had to give them why it was necessary that I get my full percentage that I gave them the value added that I bring to the table, and they said, we will pay you the difference, because I gave them an option. We can bump the price up and ask the seller to pay the full, or you can pay the difference. And they said, we'll pay the difference. So I was very comfortable moving forward with it on that. But I spent some good solid time going over the buyer agency agreement with them, explaining to them, I am going to be compensated X amount of percent.
What part of the country are they?
Texas.
I have one quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
If the buyers agents aren't being compensated, and the buyer says, well, I'll just go directly to the listing agent, isn't that throwing us into a potential dual agency program again?
Who is being thrown in? You as the buyer
The
agent or you as the
sales
listing agent?
Wouldn't that be throwing them into a dual
No.
agency?
Because there are specific duties you do as a listing agent you can't provide the buyer. You can't give the buyer a CMA or a reverse CMA to show them what they should be paying for the house.
They're represent their seller's representative on both sides. So it is not dual agency at all. It is Yeah, it is an
The
unrepresented
buyer
buyer.
is
at that point.
unrepresented. And there's some statements in our standard contract that have to do with what we do, the inspections that are done. And if they want me to explain those to them, I can't do that. You know, you don't have an agent. Well, if somebody comes to me and says, should I get a survey? And they don't have an agent, I say, check out paragraph X and you make the decision.
There's gonna also be a ton of undisclosed buyer agency going on. You know, they're going to be, if my sister's buying a house and I'm her buyer agent, and I've never met this seller who's not compensating buyer agents, I'm still gonna help my seller or my sister, right? But I'm gonna do it as a seller's agent. Do you think I'm really gonna be a seller's agent? It's gonna be a butt ton of undisclosed representation going
Mhm.
on. Open more lawsuits.
Yep.
I don't see where that benefits the public.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm gonna do something real quick. I'm gonna share my screen again. And I'm gonna have the drawing. Green. And for the name, we gotta have somebody who's either still on or somebody who is in the room.